Hi everyone, welcome to the latest in Hunters Hill Council's series of Lunchtime Learning. Jo from Good for the Hood is presenting on Be a Smart Cookie today, which is going to be a really interesting workshop. So thank you for attending, and I will hand over to Jo, and at the end of this session I'll tell you about some of the other workshops that are coming up as well. Thank you, Jo.
Thanks so much, Gabby, and thank you all for joining us. This is now our third session that we've been running with Hunters Hill Council. So thank you so much for their support. And today is about being a smart cookie. And hopefully by the end of this, you are going to feel equipped with more knowledge about buying food better than ever before. And today is all about understanding the way we purchase food and how we can be part of the solution to reducing food waste in Australia. This is being recorded. It will be available to share if you've got people that you think need to see this, or that maybe want to be part of the conversation after today, then please feel free to share it with them. We'll have lots of opportunities to answer questions if you've got specific things that you'd like to ask, but we really hope today's practical, light. We want to keep it light. I was just saying to Gabby, it's a really nice time to just think about the pragmatic, practical things we can do as community members when the world feels a little hard at times. So today is all about food, and if you're feeling hungry at the end of this, then that's great, because we've got some really great strategies for you to go in there and use those things in your fridge. So I'd like to also acknowledge that we are on the land of the Wallumattagal today. If you are in Hunters Hill or in the Hunters Hill Council area, or if you are myself in Ryde, you are on the land of the Snapperfish people on Eora and Darug Nations, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and welcome anyone here who identifies as Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander today. My name is Jo Taranto, and I am a community sustainability educator. This is my jam, pun intended. I love talking about things that get people feeling connected to the planet around them, and to get them feeling great about being in the communities that they live. I live in Ryde. This is where I've raised my family, and I've had lots to do with the Hunters Hill community over the years as well. And the one thing that I feel unites us all is that we all, regardless of where we work or who we are or how old we are, we all have to live in our communities, and there are certain behaviours that are similar to all of us, no matter where we're at. So food and consumption of food and buying food is one of them. So we all can play a role then in some of the solutions. My background is actually as an occupational therapist. So I spent about 15 years working with people in the community and in aged care settings and in hospitals. And I know that food is a great unifier and a great leveler, really, because ultimately it's something we have to work with and love or hate every day. And it is a great gift to be able to eat and enjoy food. My last 5 years have been working with Good for the Hood, and really looking at ways that we can take sustainability behaviours and embed them into our daily lives. On a very personal note, I'm also the 6th generation who's grown up on the land. I no longer do live on a farm, but this is my father and my eldest son, and my dad was a farmer, his dad was a farmer, his dad was a farmer, his dad was a farmer, and his dad was a farmer. The women, of course, played a very important role, but as they tended to be, they supported life on the land. So I've seen firsthand the impacts of the Millennium Drought. I've lived through the crises of being able to pay bills, feed livestock, destroy crops because of, supply issues. I've seen the deeply emotional connection that farmers and growers have with what they create. My family were beef producers. They also threw their hand at some wine growing, which was very lucrative industry, particularly for me while I was at university. But growing food and growing things for the community is a really deep connection that farmers and people who grow food have. So everything I talk about today comes from a lens of understanding that, and I think it's important to recognise that food is not something that we just get at the supermarket. It has a really long journey and a really strong connection to country as well. In saying that, in Australia, we have a bit of a crisis when it comes to food. We know that, worldwide, about a third of the food that is grown and created is wasted. So it can happen at various points along the way, which we will talk about, but a third of everything that is put in the ground or created ends up going back into the ground and not used as food at all. We know that 8% of the global greenhouse gases in the world are created from food waste, not from the production of food, but from food waste itself. And as such, if food waste was a country, it would be the third biggest emitter of global greenhouse gases globally, sitting just behind America and China. And we also know that in Australia, about 20% of people do not have food security or adequate access to knowing where their next meal will come from, despite the fact that we have ample amounts of food. So how do we get here, and what can we do about it? We know that food loss and food waste happens throughout the whole cycle of creation of food, and that consumers actually have a really critical role in this process. So the life of food starts on a farm, whether it's fruit, vegetable, livestock, meat, dairy products, or a grain or grain product, which will maybe go on to be manufactured into something else. Primary production has a role in food loss. So we know that there is a lot of food that doesn't ever make it off the farm. Now that can happen because of drought, because of pests, because of lack of adequate water, but often it can happen because of lack of supply. We've seen the situation with strawberry production and broccolini production and a whole bunch of other foods and fruits and vegetables during lockdown, is that restaurants that were providing the markets for these were not buying those products, and therefore the growers didn't have anywhere to sell it to. We see those horrible pictures of fruit growers having to bulldoze crops because they just don't have a market. So food loss can happen at the primary production end. And then there's a whole cycle in the middle as well. So about 30% of our food is lost in the manufacturing and retail space. So it's either spoiled before it's been able to be sold, it's not made it out of the store because of maybe damage, or there was a loss along the way. So we know that food waste and food loss also happens before it even gets to us. But we know that about 30% of food waste happens within our homes. A third of our national food waste is happening when we get it home to our houses. And that's what we'll be talking about today. What role can you play in avoiding food waste by buying food better? Now, when we talk about food waste, it is a generational issue, but it is not one generation's problem. Each of us have a challenge when it comes to this. And on average, we see around 10% or thereabouts of our groceries, and up to as much as 20% of our groceries not being wasted. So that visual of bringing home 5 of your bags from the shop and at least nearly 1 of those not making it onto a plate, but just putting it straight in the bin. And when you think of food waste like that, it seems like such a pointless exercise. And I guess ultimately it is. But why does it happen? Partly because food has become a really low order issue for us. We have, for most of us, adequate access to food, stores that have great food, but that element that we saw through the beginning of the pandemic, where there was hoarding and large consumptions of food, shows us that we have a cycle of food which may not always be as robust as that. So what we see is that on average, by generation, we're seeing between $400 and $1,200 loss of food based on per year. So about $400 for the average baby boomer, is lost on food waste. Now, when it comes to people who are a lot younger, we see that escalate nearly as 3 times as much. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. Obviously, it comes down to very different behavioural responses. Maybe it comes back to learnt lessons, but also we know that through the pandemic and through access to food delivery services, that our consumption habits are constantly changing. So during the pandemic, we have seen a lot more people cooking at home, which in theory is wonderful. We're getting in touch with our inner chefs. We're making things we've never made before. We're experimenting with new recipes and failing, if you're me. But we're also buying a lot more food. Everyone has saw that, urgency and anxiety that's come from needing to fill the cupboards and make sure that we don't have to keep going to the shops. We've been instructed by health orders and politicians to make sure you do big shops. Don't go to the shops every day, avoid the shops. So all of a sudden, we've seen a lot more people buying more and cooking more at home. We've also seen people getting takeaway a lot more. So people cannot go to restaurants, therefore they're ordering, Uber Eats or Menulog or whatever their, preferred app is, or contacting their local store and getting takeaway. We're also seeing people buying different brands of food and experimenting, perhaps trying different things or accessing brands that they couldn't get their favorite brand before. So we're seeing real shifts in what we're doing at home, and the pandemic has changed a lot of our habits. Now, if they stay that way, will be interesting. I can't imagine that all of us will want to keep cooking at home the way we have been after lockdowns end. I think we'll see a return to a lot more hospitality venues, which comes with its own food waste issues. But for now, this is what we're facing. And you've probably seen that your bins are a little fuller than they normally are. And you're going through food at a rate that has surprised us all. When it comes to food delivery services, we see that about 60% of us, or nearly 2/3, are now using takeaway delivery services. And we also have a rise in the number of people using pre-prepared food delivery services as well, like HelloFresh. And making the most of that kind of convenience, sort of door-to-door, low preparation meals. And we've also seen it from restaurants during lockdown. Restaurants providing you with services that will let you have the base ingredients and just do the final cook at home. But we know that the use of food delivery services correlates with individuals wasting nearly twice as much food. Now, there's an argument that when we use pre-prepared delivery services that we actually waste less because it has a finite amount of food that is provided. But what we see with takeaway delivery services is that there is a lot more food waste. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that people overorder. And I know that I spend infinitely more on takeaway through those services than perhaps if I rang a store, partly because it looks so good and it's so easy to order. I think the process of making that order so very simple. There's also no judgment from the person on the other end of the line when they realize it's just one person ordering 20 Japanese meals. Our consumption habits have shifted, and the more use of these delivery services is correlating with an increase in food waste as well. But why is food wasted in our homes outside the pandemic? And this is the sorts of reasons that the research has said that about 75% of our food is actually going off before we can finish it. So most people who reported in this survey said that, oh, well, it's just wasted because it went moldy. I forgot it was there, and it looks horrific. So about 45% of us report just buying way too much food. More food that you could possibly use up in your household. There's a percentage of us are buying food and then just saying, well, it just wasn't what I wanted it to be. It didn't taste right. I tried it, you opened it and you went, oh no, that's not something I can eat. And there's a large 35% of 34% of us saying that also we didn't really plan for the meals. So it kind of all went by the wayside. And by the end of that time, I just had to chuck out some stuff because I just couldn't get through it. And I always like to think of food planning comes into its own on holidays when you've got a deadline to get out of an accommodation and you've got a kitchen full of food. Is the food planning element comes into its own. All of a sudden, you've got this end goal and you know you want to get that empty cupboard out. And I think that's how we need to start thinking about our food in our homes. Just because there's an abundance of food that we may feel does not mean that this is an infinite resource. As we've seen, there are still a lot of people in the world going very hungry. Planning to use up the food in our homes is a challenge that we need to be willing to take up. This isn't an inconsequential issue. This isn't something that has no impact. This is a very impactful thing. And if you can do nothing else for the planet and your community, reducing the amount of food, good food, that goes into your bin is a really, really simple thing that you can do. So we talk about food waste, in my opinion, from three types of responses. It's gone off. The first thing is we open that fridge and you pick up that piece of cheese and it has green spots that you know should not be there. Or the loaf of bread, you pick it up and you've seen that it's started to churn as well. Or you open a container at the back of your fridge and you do the whole reel back. We have a real challenge in our homes of dealing with spoiled food. We have great systems in our home to manage food spoilage. We have refrigeration, great pantries, great lighting, access to great containers, ventilation. There's no reason that we should have the amount of food spoilage in our homes that we do. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Now, these are the core contributors to that, it's gone off outcome. First of all is that we're not storing food correctly. We're not keeping food at its maximum freshness or safety for as long as it should be there. So next week, we are actually going to be running a workshop on food storage. So that's when we're going to tackle that topic. If that's something you think you'd like to learn more about, and that's a great session to join us. The second one is we overfill or have inadequate visibility in our refrigerators. So products get lost at the back. We can't see them. We don't know they're there. We forget, they fall behind the crisper, whatever it is. We lose track of what's there. So we forget to use it in that period or that window of time. The other one is we partially use ingredients and then we don't use the second item before the rest of the remnants before it's gone off. Now we know with fresh food particularly, or perishable food, as soon as you cut food, you are decreasing its shelf life. So you think about when you go to the supermarket and there's a pre-prepared food packaged up versus the food on the shelf. The pre-prepared food has such a short shelf life compared to the food in its natural skin, rind, whole package. So as soon as we chop up something, cut something, open something, that it's like a ticking time bomb. That item does not have anything like the shelf life it had before you cut into it. So only using an ingredient and putting it back in the fridge is like a big warning sign that that item has to be used very quickly. We're also not particularly good at judging how much food we need. And I think through the pandemic, we've lost that completely. We've really lost touch with how much food actually is required to sustain us. because all of a sudden that anxiety about whether the items that we need will be at the store have come to the fore. So it's really important to understand that we do have food in our stores and that we do have access to good, healthy food. We don't need to fill our homes with it to feel secure. Now, I'll talk in a second about our relationship with food. And the thing about it is that we know it's not just one we have with a human need. We know that it goes very deep into some very emotional places. We know that there's comfort provided by a full pantry, that there is security that comes with knowing the fridge is stocked. There's happiness that comes from seeing a line of beautiful produce. We need to recognize that that happiness will be very short-lived if that food is spoiled. And it is spoiled because we misjudge our needs. The other reaction we see is, oh, I've just had too much. I've gone in crazy town when it comes to how many servings of this food I've created. I always love seeing people's reactions. Well, I love hate seeing people's reactions when you go to a dinner party or a barbecue and people bring a platter like this for their family, fully knowing that that's feeding the crowd. But if every single person who arrives with that amount of food, that the expectation is that each of you will have to eat that amount of food. And I think it's a sense of, we just want to see this abundance and this joy that food is brought to us, but we really overestimate how much food is actually going to be eaten. We're also really bad at cooking the right amount for our families. Some people do that very deliberately, so they have leftovers and they love the idea of leftovers. Some people refuse to use leftovers. So it becomes this guessing game of, well, I've cooked too much. If it can't go to the dog, it's going in the bin. So we need to get really good at estimating what we actually are going to eat. And if you're anything like me, as a parent with young kids, I have no idea whether my children are going to eat this or not. And it's a daily, juggle of whether they're going to have anything or they're going to say, oh, how come there's none left? So I get that it's not a simple equation, but we do tend to overestimate how much food we need. And the flip side of that is that we're not using those leftovers effectively after. One of the challenges we also have, and we've seen this during lockdown, is that we make something and we don't like it. It doesn't taste right. It doesn't taste good. Someone else has made it for it. It's horrible. So what do we do with it? We're left with this food that we know it should be eaten, but is just actually quite unpleasant for our taste buds. That goes for baking something or making something which is burnt or, being just a complete disaster, followed a recipe. One of my least favorite things is when food comes back from school, that sandwich that comes back and it's been in that hot lunchbox all day. What do I do with that food waste? It's now inedible if it's been sitting in that hot sun all day and it's had ham or something on it. And obviously, as I talked about before, that food that is overcreated at events, this sense that we have this abundance of food. And about 2 hours in, you start to look at the food table and you can see the cheeses start to go a bit hard around the edges and the dips kind of got a bit of a film on top. And you know that the chips have gone soggy and people are really not going to be eating that. So we have a real problem when it comes to the amount of food that we're creating. The other thing we're very nervous of in Australia is label confusion and that sense that the food has turned or gone off. Now, we have really great food standards in Australia, and safety and the health and safety of our community is always first and foremost. But we're very, very cautious when it comes to labeling that is on food. And part of that is because we don't really understand it. There's a lot of confusion about what certain labels mean and whether if I eat it, I'm going to die, or whether it just means it's not as good as it was, or somewhere in between. We have lost that capacity to do the old sniff test and go, oh, it's all right. And I know that within couples and families that this can be a real source of entertainment, because there's always someone in the family who's willing to go there and say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to drink the milk anyway. And the other who goes, that's disgusting, throw it out. So I'm not saying that we should be embarking on a journey of risking our lives to save food, but there is a lot of evidence to suggest that we are prematurely discarding food because of what we think is no longer fit for use and what is actually still fit for use. So we're going to talk a little bit about use by dates, best before dates, sell by dates, baked on dates, those sorts of things, those labels that we will see on food, and also where you can go for some more information about those. But it is we have got a far more complex system in Australia than we do have in some other countries. So there has been a lot of talk about what it would do to standardise those food labels and take out some of that fear, because ultimately we get very nervous when we know it's sitting towards that that date of no longer being safe. So buying better and being a smart cookie is all about three things as I see it. First and foremost, it's about mindset. It's about understanding that to prevent food waste at home, you actually have to want to do it. It will not change unless you make an attempt and decide that that's what you're going to do. And for you to decide that that is something that's important, you have to see it as an important step. So I'm going to talk a little bit in a second about what food means. And I want you to tap into some of that emotion about what food means to you, and recognize that we really have an amazing opportunity to take action at home, and that with the right mindset, that you can actually prevent food going in the bin. The second step is to really look at a strategy that works for you and your family. Now I'm going to talk about a couple of things today that I find very useful, and that and a couple of strategies that will enable you to prevent food waste. But you probably already have your own, and you probably already know where your pitfalls are with food waste. So recognizing that food waste needs to stop in your home, that you need to have a strategy that works, and then that needs to just become the habit that you implement daily. And it is a daily thing, and you will fall down, but recognizing that habitual changes, once they're embedded into your family life, will enable you to prevent food waste. I will also say that the thing about food waste is that most people, a bit like drinking alcohol or gambling or spending too much at the shops, most people really underestimate how much they waste. Most people think, yeah, not me though. I'm really good at that. I don't throw out anything. What with the research says is that people vastly underestimate how much food actually gets wasted. Now, if you're someone who composts at home, you have a fairly good idea of how much compostable waste you're creating. So that does help. But there's also all the bread and meat and other waste when you think about it, the pastas, the rices, the leftovers foods that go into that. So the first thing I would really be useful for you to understand is how much food is actually going in the bin or into the compost that had some value still, or that, you know, that was lost prematurely. Food is so much more than what we eat. It is so much more than just what we put in our bodies to stay alive. It is a very, very complex relationship that we have. It's about how we show love and how we recognize people in our family. It's about tradition. It's about skills and vocations and creating, you know, an environment. It's about celebration and connection, tradition, identity, culture. You name an event in the world, in any culture, and there's a food associated with it. It's deeply entrenched. And the habits and relationship we have with food, good, bad, indifferent, starts very early. And we know that our taste buds and the way we feel about food and the way we see food starts very early. So if you've grown up with an abundance of food and a really healthy, happy relationship with food, and you've never really thought that it's something that, you know, beyond something that you need to eat and enjoy, you know, maybe it's a chance to look at how others view food, and that food is actually a very, very vast and, you know, diverse meaning for a lot of different people. And recognizing what goes into creating food as well, the time, the energy, the effort, the emissions, the water, the sheer hard work that goes into creating this stuff. If you've ever grown a tomato or a potato or a strawberry, you know it is very hard to do well. So recognizing that food is just not something we need to take for granted. It's a gift, and it's something that we need to celebrate. And the way we celebrate food is by not wasting it. Food has a cycle in our world, and the best strategy to enable us to reduce food waste is to follow this process every time you need to buy something or cook something. Please always check your pantry and your fridge. Sometimes, if you're like me, you're so over going to that thing and opening it and going, what have I got that I can possibly create? But the biggest thing you can do to avoid food waste is to cook with what you have. We're so blessed by all this beautiful produce at the stores that the thought of using the crappy packet of chickpeas that have been sitting in there for 2 months isn't always what we want to think about doing. But if we bought it, we need to use it, or find an appropriate place for it to be used. So checking your pantry and fridge is instrumental in starting that process. Now, a lot of people are super organized when it comes to meals, and some people couldn't think of anything less they'd like to do. But planning a meal is really important because that enables you to factor in using up those items. So meal planning and then buying with a shopping list is really important. Storing it correctly and then cooking it well, and then going through that process again. Now, here's some of my strategies to help you, if you don't already do this, to look at ways that you can avoid some of those pitfalls which we talked about. So first of all is looking at the way we place items in our fridge. Now, Oz Harvest has just released its new campaign called Use It Up, and it's the perfect strategy to enable us to get through those items which are on the edge of spoiling. Use It Up is a campaign to use those items in your fridge which will perish if you don't use them in the next few days. I have the top shelf of my fridge as my Use It Up shelf. I haven't labeled it, but you can label if you like, and you can even buy some labels. I think the labels are free, but postage is $4, I believe. But in your family, creating a Use It Up shelf is really useful. What goes on that shelf is your leftovers, your pre-cut items, cheeses, you know, ham or meats that might, you know, need to go in the next day or so. You know, maybe a lettuce that's on its way, you know, that's in a container. Things that you think the next couple of meals need to use. Cooked rice, anything that's, you know, if you don't get onto it, it's going to go. Now, I have a cycle in my family where if I can freeze it, I will. I'm a big fan of freezing food. It's amazing how many things can be frozen. And what I think about freezing is that it really is the pause button on that food perishing. Sure, frozen food does not always keep its freshness in exactly the same way as if you didn't. But when it comes to that window of keeping an item fresh, freezing food is a really great strategy. So I have this play between taking items out of the freezer and putting it on my Use It Up shelf and pulling it out to prep my meal. What that enables me to do is really stay on top of that food waste that's, is potentially going to happen. So when you're planning your meals, your use it up shelf is kind of like your mystery box on MasterChef. That's what you got to play with, people. This is what we're going to use. Let's make something with it. So every night is like MasterChef in your house, and that is your core ingredients. And if you're going to hero an ingredient, it's got to be on that shelf or supplemented with some of the other things in your kitchen. Now, for a lot of people, that just seems like a really tiresome and frankly quite gross way of eating food, because to be honest, every night I want to eat something gourmet and slightly different. But the trick is that, and what I've found is that it really enables you to try different things, because all of a sudden I have an artichoke and some chicken livers and I got to make something out of it. I've never bought chicken livers. But there's ways of creating and sparking that creativity, and it's a really great exercise for your family. And maybe it's telling you not to buy certain ingredients again, if that's the way you feel. Now, I want to talk a little bit about labels, and in Australia, these are the two you'll see most. You will see others, particularly when it comes to bread, but this is the two legislated labels. First is best before, and the other is used by. Most people freak out when they see any date on food, and my son did it the other day. Mom, it's gone out of date. He completely got it wrong and thought it was a November date and thought it was September. But it's amazing that visceral reaction we have to a date on a piece of food. Now, most foods will have a best before label. It is legislated that foods will have this late if they, but you can still eat food after this date. It's not a requirement that it is unhealthy or unsafe past this date. It is still edible. The reason best before dates are legislated is that it's particularly important when there's a nutritional requirement which may have been lost after that date, particularly for something like infant formula or medical supplements. Best before dates are really useful. It might say that, well, after that date, I can't guarantee that it has X amount of calcium in it, but it is still safe to eat. Does that mean that we should save all our food after our best before date? No, but just because it's hit the best before date does not mean it is unsafe to eat. And it can still be sold after this date as well. Legally can still be sold in the store after the best before date. After the best before date, that makes sense. The use by date, on the other hand, is a health and safety requirement. The food that is in a that is past its use by date may have contaminants in it, might have microbial infestation. We cannot guarantee, and the producer of that food cannot guarantee that it does not have particularly harmful. And we're talking about salmonellas and listeria and those sorts of bacterial things, which we know can cause quite serious illness. You cannot sell food after a use by date. And if you have food that is past its use by date in your pantry, do not eat it. So the challenge is, how do we make sure that we get food to be used before the use by date? That's your window of, all right, it's gone. Now, if you're like me, when it comes to milk or something like that, I still like to do the smell test. If I know my milk is used by X date and it still smells great, I'm pretty confident that that food is still okay. That's a risk I take. And I don't think that we should just ignore our senses when it comes to things like milk in particular. But there are certain foods like canned foods where you can look at it and it looks okay, but that if it's past its use by date, you just cannot guarantee that it is safe to eat. One of my favorite strategies then is to make sure that when we buy food, and we're buying food that is close to its use by date, if we can, put it straight in the freezer. As long as you freeze food before its use by date, it's fine to keep staying that, as long as the food is freezable, of course. So freeze it before it's used by date, and then when you're ready to use it, bring it out, put it on your use it up shelf and prepare it. So a lot of people like shopping in the reduced section of the supermarket where there is these items that are going to go out in the next couple of days. And if you come home with 3 packs of meat and you're thinking, I'm never going to be able to get through that by Tuesday, pop 2 of them in the freezer, and then it buys you some time. Very safe to do. If it's past its use by date and then you freeze it, not so good. So the trick is to buy it, freeze it before its use by date, and then use it up. Now, shopping lists are so kind of old school, and I know that I for years was like, oh, I don't need a shopping list. But I've become a big advocate of the shopping list, partly because my memory seems poorer than ever, and I love the idea of just jumping on the notes app in my phone and putting it down when I think of the item that's there. One of the things that I found really useful for me is a list of things to not buy. Because what I found during the pandemic is that I tend to get to either the shops or go online and go, I think I need, and as soon as I do that, I know I'm in trouble, because I end up with 5 cans of baby corn, 6 cans of coconut milk, 12 kilos of rice. My memory is a really unreliable source of information. So when I know that I've got excess of certain items, I like a little note for myself saying, please don't buy tomato paste. You have enough tomato paste to get through to the next pandemic. So it's sometimes useful. And if you are sharing the notes with a family member and they're going to do the shop, give them a little instruction. Please don't buy milk. We have 6 litres of milk. We do not need milk. Just because a lot of people go into the shops with that just in case. Oh, I should get milk just in case. And you only need a couple of times for that to happen for you to be looking at a lot of lost milk. There's some great apps. If you want to get into apps, and apps are your thing, and that's, there's some great. I love Notes because it's free and it's easy and I can share it with family members. But there's 3 great ones there. List on it, and Mealime. It is actually Mealime. It's not a typo. They're all free, and they're just apps that you can use to plan meals and also plan your shop as well. Some other things to be aware of is that impulse buying is so easy to do, and we've heard it from a very young age. Don't shop while you're hungry, because you'll end up buying infinitely ridiculous amounts of things you don't need. And it's scientifically proven that if you go into the supermarket hungry, you'll buy not only food that you don't need, not only food that is unhealthier than you would normally buy, but also you can be more predisposed to buying food, non-food items as well. So they did a whole bunch of research into people who are hungry and doing online shopping. They were more likely to buy items like binders, because there's a need center in our body that's craving things, and it activates this predisposition to buy more things. You're likely to spend up to 60% more if you're hungry. That's an awful lot more. We're very driven by food. So if you're hungry, it's a terrible time to shop. I would suggest, if you've turned up in the shops and you're starving and there's only a supermarket there, go in, buy what you want to eat, come out, eat it, and then go back in and do your shop. Because we know that while that need center is unsatisfied, you will just be like a beast picking up stuff that you never needed. And that's a really dangerous time for impulse buying. We also know that you're very at risk of buying things you don't need if you go in just to browse. I just want to have a look, just look around the store. Don't need anything, don't. Supermarkets are absolutely designed to sell to us, and we'll talk about that in a sec. but don't go in just for something to do unless you don't have any way of buying something. If you don't want to come out with things you don't need, do not go into the supermarket to browse. The other research shows that if we shop with someone, and this goes for kids or friends or family members, we're more likely to buy more. And that's that whole, oh, do we need this? Oh, we should get this. Oh, don't. You know, there's a conversation that happens. We get distracted. So if you can, shop alone. You're going to save more and potentially bring home less ridiculous items. Now, we know Choice is very good at calling out, you know, strategies for excess consumption and also, you know, claims that can make us buy things we don't need. But they've done a really great insights into how supermarkets are set up, and it's a very fascinating world. The world of fast-moving consumer goods is literally a world of tapping into our needs and our wants and our behaviors. And supermarkets are set up like this perfect beast to enable us to buy food. And not just buy food, but buy everything that we didn't go in there for. So we know that supermarkets are designed to enable us to walk counterclockwise. We know that that's where they want us to go. They don't want us to go in and grab something at one end and then come straight back out again. They want us to do the IKEA loop, that maze. They want us to go all the way in and all the way through every aisle and come back out, because that's the way that they're going to maximize their capacity to sell. We know that fruit and veg are always at the front. That's a very deliberate ploy to make you feel like this is a fresh, welcoming, healthy place to be. Can you imagine what it'd be like if the front row of the supermarket was all toilet cleaning products? It just doesn't have the same feel. They're very good at tapping into our emotions and making feel abundant and colourful, and the scents and the smells, the music. It's all part of an experience to get you to buy. We know that the products with the largest profit margins are going to be right here at the most easy to purchase level. The items which are better bargains or have lower profit margins will be top or bottom. So that's why you often see sale items right at the bottom shelf. You're like, oh, there it is. We know bread and milk will be often completely opposite ends of the store and in the periphery, right at the back of one side and right at the back of the other, because often we just go in for those two items, but we've got to do the whole loop. So while we're here, we may as well buy Milo and, you know, a Halloween costume as well. We know that product suppliers pay the most for aisle ends. So those items which sit on the ends are deliberately pushed in your face. And we know also that we're very likely to look at the items at the cashier as well, or at the cash register. We know that increasingly you'll see pasta with pasta sauce, or Mexican foods with Mexican foods. New items will be splashed around, whether they're new or not. You'll see bulk buys and multi-buys incentivized, and all of these things are there to make you buy more. And that's okay, as long as you're aware of it. They're a business. They provide a great service during the pandemic and all the rest of the time of the year. But just be aware that if you're coming out with items you don't need, it's because you've been done by these tricks. Because supermarkets are designed for what you want as well as what you need. And the layout of that is designed to create that purchase behavior. So the way to overcome that is to be prepared, to go in with a plan. That is why meal planning and shopping lists are critical, because when you go in with a plan, you can map out your shop and not fall victim to maybe all of the things that you might want to get along the way. So my personal preference is to actually not buy my fresh food and veggies from a supermarket, and to buy it from local growers and providers in my community. There's a couple of reasons why I preference that. First of all is that I know the freshness of that food is better than what I can get at the supermarket. I know that supermarket produce, as wonderful as it can be, in some stores and some ranges have been sitting in refrigerated stores for some time. So by the time I get it to my house, it might already be a lot older than perhaps some of the other produce I can get. I also really like to support growers, and so I tend to think that anywhere we can take out the middleman has to increase profit margins for growers. And I like the idea of supporting local businesses, our local butcher and our local deli. That's just something that feels good for me. I also like buying seasonal food, and there's a reason why seasonal food is good for the planet, and it's not just air miles. It's a lot about the fact that it is going to stay fresher longer. It was meant to grow at this time of year. It hasn't had to come from some other microclimate. It hasn't had to come here, via refrigerated transport. It was in season. It's been grown in Sydney. It's here, and it's also more nutritious when it's in season as well. Now, if you want to know what's in season, there's a great guide there from Sustainable Table, who are a fantastic organisation that run a lot of education and a lot of work around ethical and sustainable food production. And they have a great initiative there. The other thing to be aware of in our supermarkets is cosmetic standards. I really like buying from growers who have ugly produce, because it means that 30% of food loss that happens at our farms and our growers is somewhat prevented. Now, if you saw the War on Waste a few years ago, you would have seen Craig Rucastle going to a banana farm and watching literally tons of bananas wasted. And the reason they were wasted was not because they were infested with a parasite or any disease, was simply because they were either the wrong shape or the wrong size. We have become so discerning at the supermarket about what a good banana looks like that we won't choose bananas if they look a bit wonky or if they're not that nice yellow color and good shape. Now, there has been some changes since that show. We do see a lot of providers talking about imperfect picks or ugly fruit or rare cuts. The reason that's great is that it provides another income stream for farmers. It means that that stuff, which is being created, trust me, is just going to you and not into the paddock. It also normalizes what food looks like. If you've grown something at home, you know that you don't very often grow a perfect lemon or a perfect orange or a strawberry that looks like it does they are wonky, they're curly, they're slightly discolored sometimes. Does it mean they're any less delicious or nutritious? No. I think it's really good that kids understand what food actually looks like. And when I pulled out a carrot the other day from my veggie garden and it had a wonky end, my son said, "Wow, that's a really weird looking carrot." And I said, "Is it? Or is it just what carrots actually look like when we grow them at home?" And so I think it's important to know that imperfect is actually natural. We've created this perception that our food has to look a certain way. And look, I know what the sort of food I put on a plate in front of me, and it is not a perfect looking meal. So why do I insist that my produce has to look perfect? That's just not the kind of show I run at home. So cut yourself some slack and support the growers who grow this food that is completely delicious and very usable. A lot of food like this ends up at Food Bank and Oz Harvest because the growers and suppliers can't sell it, so it goes there. So I'm a big fan of, when you go to the supermarket, of finding the 1 or 2 bananas that have been kind of pulled off. Single bananas are a huge source of waste. So if you've seen, a tomato that's come off and it's sitting on its own, or a single banana, the little fruit orphans or veggie orphans, pick them up, because people tend not to buy items that have been separated or big out of the clump. They just, I don't know what it is. I think it's maybe a mixture of convenience and also concern of what's wrong with that one. But grab that produce, because it may not make it home with someone else, and it will end up in the food waste. Now, something about multi-buys and bulk buying is that we're in this situation where we've got really good at buying 5 cucumbers in a packet, or 4 tomatoes pre-packaged up, or 6 apples in a box. And that's the way food is sold, and it's sold to us as if it's a saving. It's really important to understand that actually that may not be a saving. A lot of this work behind the scenes is that the individual cost items can be elevated, and then the multi-buy can actually make it look like it's a cheaper purchase. It's not always a saving, and it's definitely not a saving if ultimately it's going to end up in the bin at your house because you can't get through it. Also, it's great to buy bulk. It's great to go to stores with low packaging and buy bulk, but just make sure that whatever you're bringing home is what you can safely use before it's no longer going to be edible or it gets spoiled. There's really great ways of planning your meal. My strategy is always go to your use it up shelf first. Always use what's in the freezer. You need your freezer partially empty so that you can put leftovers and other items in it. If your freezer is perpetually full, you need to start pulling food out of the freezer more often. I wouldn't plan many more than purchasing for about 3 or 4 meals a week. And hear me out, and this is why. We are going to cook more food than we need at each meal. There is going to be a requirement for leftovers. If you prepare 6 meals or 7 meals for your week and you buy for 7 meals in your week, you are going to have more food than you can possibly eat. You need to plan for a couple of meals. Know that you're going to eat leftovers for a couple of meals. Know that on Friday night, you're not going to cook for yourself. You're going to want takeaway, and that's fine. But factor that in. Don't buy so much food that for your weekly shop, you're going to come home with 7 meals and then you're going to have leftovers, and next week you're going to shop for 7 meals again. So enable room for leftovers and takeaway in your meal planning. And just finally, around sharing and gifting of food, there's a real capacity to donate food. I encourage people to do so. There's lots of ways of doing that. You can link up with, Sydney Community Services. You can donate at your local supermarket sometimes. You can put a share table out if you've got extra produce, that, they can consider a community pantry, but also consider the real need. Are you doing this because you want to help them and this is what they need? Or you're doing this because, once again, you've just bought too many canned tomatoes? Because often we think that helping people is giving them what we don't need, and helping people is actually giving them what they need. So we need to be realistic and not just make ourselves feel good because we've given them what we don't want anymore. Find out what their need is and support them that way. But, they don't need 62 cans of chickpeas because we've all gone a little bit crazy in that area. So here's your challenge. I want you to look at the food you've been putting in the bin, whether it's scraps, whether it's stuff that's just beyond its use by date. And what would you do if you couldn't actually get to the shops in the next little bit? What would you have to use up in your family home or in your home? What would it make you do differently? That's the challenge. Obviously, you can go to the shops, but I want people to start thinking about what we already have. We've got an abundance of food, an absolute abundance. Use it. All right. I'm going to take any questions. Ultimately, food is so much more than the sum of its parts. It is all of these beautiful emotional connections. Treat it with joy, treat it with love, treat it with care. Embrace it and tap into that use it up mindset, and then develop a strategy that's going to work for you. It is up to you to avoid that food waste. And when you go to those shops, walk in and recognize that this is about selling to you, and that you don't actually have to fall for the techniques if you've got a good, strong plan.
Thank you, Jo.
Yeah, sorry.
There is a question, which you've covered off some of it, but the question was, I find portion size difficult when it's a one dish dinner with rice or pasta with veggies. Is there an easy way to calculate portions for 5 adults? What size is the plate when they say half the plate should be veggies?
It's upsettingly always smaller than you think. It's a bit like when you talk about standard drinks and wine glasses and we go, oh, is it half, half this glass? No. Standard portion sizes, and I'd suggest that the best one would be the Australian government. I'll send it out to Gabby as well. But there's some fantastic, go to reputable, but the Australian government sites for healthy eating would probably be they're the ones that talk about the food pyramid, and that in terms of portion sizes, generally it's the size of your fist, but we all have different size fists, for protein and carbohydrates. And yeah, plate sizes are infinitely bigger now than really what we probably should be using. So there is, so I'll share a link with that for you as well.
And there is the food clock as well. So how to divide your dinner plate into the sizes of protein versus vegetables versus legumes and everything. So you can look at that too.
Creating enough rice, cooking enough rice is an absolute superpower. I've never met anyone who goes, oh, just made enough rice. It's either I've run out or I've created about 17 meals. So I get it. It's very, and pasta's the same. I've been part of an Italian family, and I get that it's very hard to quantify, and having leftovers is good, but if you're not someone who's going to use them, then that's when you've really got to be aware of how much you can use there. Blessed to have a hollow kid at home, so we rarely run out of food. Awesome. Always have overcook and leftovers are demolished. That's awesome. And look, to be honest, if you've got a family that loves leftovers, you're in a very happy place. To be honest, I am blessed to have a little dog that can eat the little bits that my youngest son doesn't eat. And that is one of the strategies that I've used, obviously for certain foods only. But there are things that we can do to avoid that. And certainly having kids who are hungry and willing to eat our leftovers is an awesome one. Fantastic. I call it fridge scrying. Fun challenge, yeah. Awesome. All right. If there's no other questions, Gabby, I might let you plug the next workshop and let everyone walk.
Thank you so much for that, Jo. That was brilliant, and everyone I think learnt a lot about that. It's really good, and it really ties in nicely to your next workshop, which will be on story tracks for the kitchen. So that will be really, really interesting. And I think this whole series goes together really well. We have recorded all of them so far, so including this one. So you will be able to watch those. I will send them out to everyone who is in this session. You can book for the next session as well. And if you go to the website, which is huntershill.nsw.gov.au/events, all of the links are there, and you can book there through Eventbrite. And it's been fabulous. And thank you, Jo. And as I did say in the chat, there is restrictions willing. I think there is a growers market coming up on the 5th of December at Henley. So that's a good place to find local growers. But of course, everything depends on things. So thank you so much, Jo. Might want to finish recording now.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And go and have a lunch full of leftovers. Talk to you soon.
Okay.